Welcome back to another episode of RNT Fitness Radio, and today I'm joined by Sharan Patel, who's on a mission to help change lives through the power of hypnotherapy. Having experienced some of Sharan's work firsthand, I can safely say that her techniques work. Through the process of hypnotherapy and diving into your subconscious, you'll be able to uncover some of the muck you may have been holding onto that would have shaped your belief systems, behaviours, habits, and your identity later on in life. In this episode, Sharan discusses the 5 root causes she always identifies and how to deal with them. She also dives into the topic of eating disorders, how they form, and the cycle you need to break in order to improve your relationship with food. This one goes deep, so if you're ready to add another tool to your transformation toolbox, this is one you won't want to miss. Let's dive in with the question I'm really curious about. Why do you do what you do?
And that's a really good question. I think, so I was a pharmacist for 15 years, so I know the drug side of things really, really well. And I think I just became really disillusioned with the whole pharmaceutical industry. From the drugs to even, vitamins and minerals, they're so specific to your body. I used to always sit on the fence if somebody asked me, which vitamins should I take? Because it's so specific. And even with drugs, yes, there's a place for them. But actually, I think, things like antidepressants, they can be like a plaster. So they can treat like the wound on the surface, but actually they never really get to the root cause of the problem. And so I wanted to treat people more holistically. And so I decided, my kids are of an age now where they're at full-time school. So let me do something a bit more interesting, a bit different. So I retrained, left pharmacy, and I retrained as a clinical hypnotherapist. And I love it. I love treating people with the power of their mind as opposed to the power of drugs, So
why did you choose hypnotherapy out of all the different modalities out there? What made you choose hypnotherapy? Did you have your own experience in it? Or?
I did have my own experience. So I went backpacking probably when I was your age, many moons ago. And I got really ill when I was traveling through Asia. And to the point where I basically got anxiety from it. So I used to go to the train station and my mind would say, don't get on that train. There's no toilets on that train. And I would then have a full-blown panic attack. And the panic attacks are actually there to serve me, to bring me home to my safe place. And that's what used to happen. And it got really bad to the point where I thought, I don't want to be on diazepam or Valium. So I need to do something about this. And I actually had a session of hypnotherapy myself, and it was the same type that I now practice. And I remember the very next day, I had to get from Woodford to South Kensington. And I know every station that's got toilets on the underground. And I used to get off at least 2 or 3 times, I used to get panicky. And the next day, I got to South Kensington without getting off the train once. And I listened to the recording that I had. And that's when I knew that, okay, this is, there's something in this works. And, people say it's mind over matter. And, quite simply put, yes, it is, but it's about finding out why the mind does what it does in the first place. And so that's where hypnotherapy really comes into its own, because it's really about finding out what's in the subconscious. Where is that anxiety? Where is the addiction? Where is that thing that you've got? Where is it coming from?
And did you find the root cause for your anxiety that you were feeling when you were in Asia from hypnotherapy?
Yeah. So, the root causes always tend to be the same. As I've spoken to before, you're quite aware of this as well. So no matter what you have, what issue you have, whether it is a phobia, fear, anxiety, depression, an addiction, it kind of always comes down to, I'm not good enough. I don't belong. I feel rejected, and what I want is not available to me, or I feel different. And it's always one of those 5 things, or it can be a combination of those 5 things.
Can you repeat those again, please, just for the listeners? Can you repeat those 5?
Yeah. So the main one is always, I'm not good enough. And an offshoot of that is I feel different. Often when we're growing up as kids, we can feel different. And as children, we always want to find connection. and we don't want to be rejected. And so when we feel different, then ultimately we feel rejected. So that's one of them. I feel rejected. The other ones, I don't belong. And that plays into I feel different. I'm rejected again. And then the fourth one is what I want is not available to me. So quite often when people have, problems with food, it can be that when they were growing up, they didn't have access to chocolates or sweets, they either couldn't afford them or they weren't allowed them. So what they wanted wasn't available to them. And so when they're older and it is available to them, they go overload and overdrive into, eating something they didn't have when they were younger. So they are the root causes of everyone's problems, and it works no matter what your issue is. Like I said, whether it's food, whether it's an addiction to gambling or alcohol, or whether it's anxiety of not being able to drive on a motorway, or claustrophobia, they all come down to those kind of root causes. But it doesn't mean that you had a bad childhood or that you've had, a negative upbringing. Sometimes I've had clients where they've had a positive upbringing and positive childhood, but it's the experience and the meaning they attach to that experience that then forms their beliefs.
Yeah, I mean that's what I experienced with you when we had our session back in, I think it was October now.
Yeah.
We'll come on to this later on in terms of how it works, but some of the experiences you took me back to, my subconscious, they were actually 60% of them were actually positive. But it was just the belief systems that I attached around it that made the experience later on in life potentially negative, or perceived to be negative.
Yeah,
which I thought was very interesting. Just to bounce back onto your experience there, because I'm keen to know like why the power of hypnotherapy really came to the forefront for you. Do you mind sharing which root cause that you experienced and what you did then to essentially improve how you felt?
I think my root cause is obviously the main one was the physical part of it, and that's that was a big thing. But underneath that, because ultimately when things happen to you in your mid-20s, they're not always the root cause, they're a trigger. So that for me was a trigger when I got ill and I had all those physical symptoms. But yeah, growing up, it's, again, like you, I had really positive experiences, but sometimes subconsciously you pick up some of the things that my dad used to say, like our family doesn't do business, for example, we're professional people. And there's like an underlying and subconscious belief that, it's a fear of rejection. It's a fear of being rejected. And there was other scenes I went back to where I did ballet when I was a child, and they turned around and said to my mom that, she's not going to be a ballerina because she's too fat. I was a bit of a podgy child. And then I had swimming lessons that my parents put me in from about 5, and I just never got it. I used to always stand right on the side where the parents couldn't see me, and I just couldn't do it. And so I had a belief system that I'm not good enough. And that all played into my future life, because that belief system was still there. And there's that fear of not being able to achieve something. So, it's played in other areas of my life with my businesses where I've procrastinated because I've had this fear of, well, what if it doesn't work? What if I fail? What if I lose money? What if this happens? What if that happens? And then your mind will do everything to stop you from actually doing it. So, you end up sometimes, not doing things for a year, putting things off, procrastinating, because your mind has got this belief that, well, you've experienced rejection as a child, so we don't want you to experience that pain again. So we're going to stop you from doing it. And that is how our mind works. Fundamentally, it's that whole fight or flight response. And that hasn't changed, from cavemen days, right? Like we're still programmed for that. Our mind is still programmed to recognize what causes us pain and what causes us pleasure. And a lot of the time, I guess, with especially with people that do RNT, they have a lot of issues around food and what they attach pleasure to and what they attach pain to. But ultimately, you can choose what you attach pain to and what you attach pleasure to. If you think about the program, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, these celebrities, they go in the jungle and they're forced to, in these tasks, eat kangaroo's penis or, I don't know, all that kind of rubbish they eat. I mean, would you eat that in a normal everyday situation? Like, never. But they eat it because they attach not pleasure, but they attach a meaning to it that says, if I eat this kangaroo's testicle, then my campmates get food tonight. And if I don't eat it, then we're going to starve. So they attach a meaning to eating that kangaroo's testicle that means I have to eat it. So they attach pleasure to eating it.
So how does it happen when you're younger, when you're forming these belief systems that you mentioned? You attach a positive or a negative. How, when, and why do these belief systems form? And especially what's interesting to me is how can positive experiences translate into negative behaviors later on? What's happening here?
It's not always negative behaviors.
Potentially, yeah. So not negative behaviors, but behaviors that you may want to work on. It's probably a better way to put it.
Because, it goes back to what I just said about your mind. So your mind picks up on what causes you pleasure, what causes you pain. And the way your mind is programmed is that your mind is wired for survival. And so you can have a positive experience. For example, I'll give you an example of a client that I had. She was in her early 30s and she kept on picking the wrong guy. She kept on getting into the wrong relationships. There were toxic relationships. So she came to me, we had a session, and under hypnosis, she went back to 3 scenes. And it was 3 different scenes, but the same thing was happening in each scene. Her dad would come home from work, and she was only small. He would pick her up, he would put her on his lap, and he would say, I love you so much. No guy's ever going to love you more than daddy. And so she heard that every single day, or, a lot during her childhood. So it's not negative from her dad's perspective, because he's just showering her with love and he's just saying, I love you so much, that no guy's ever going to match me, basically. So she then developed this belief that no matter who I choose, he's not going to live up to my dad. So in a way, she was kind of self-sabotaging her relationships without even knowing it, because her subconscious belief was, well, no guy's going to be as good as your dad. So there's a positive childhood, but there's not a negative belief, but there's just a belief system that's so strong that she then acts off that subconsciously. And a lot of our beliefs are programmed when we're younger, because that's when we start developing our beliefs. When we're born, our mind is like a sponge, and it takes everything in, and we have no filter. We just take everything in when we're a child. And then as you begin to grow around the age of 8, 9, 10, 11, we start developing beliefs based on what we've experienced. And like I said to you earlier, it's not the experiences that change you, but it's the meaning that you attach to those experiences. So, you and me could both be sitting on an aeroplane about to do a bungee jump or a skydive, and you could be like, oh my God, this is like amazing. This is like the best thing ever. And I could be like, I'm going to die. This is like the worst thing ever. So we're both experiencing exactly the same thing, but we're attaching different meanings to it.
And how do you change this belief system? Or is it possible to change a belief system?
Yeah, you can change your belief system. So I believe the mind works in 4 or 5 ways, one of which is your mind responds to words and pictures. The most important words you ever say are the words that you say to yourself. The most important opinion is your own opinion. So people don't realize the words they say to themselves. Sometimes people say things like, oh, I'm such, a numpty. I can't remember where my house keys are. I'm such a forgetful person. Or, I'm so stupid. I've done this. And actually, you're saying negative things to yourself about yourself. And they have an impact. Again, when you say, I'm so hungry, I'm starving, I could eat a horse, guarantee you're going to eat more than you should. because you are directly telling your mind all of these things. And these affirmations and visualizations, they're well known in, many different modalities of therapy. And I always give my clients the most famous example of Muhammad Ali, and he was good at both of them. He was really good at visualizing. He was really, really good at positive affirmations. He used to say, "I am the best," even before he became the best. And because he said that all the time, he did become the best. And of course, people will say he was arrogant, and there is sometimes a line that you shouldn't cross. But a lot of the time it's just confidence. It's saying to yourself, actually, I can do this. I am enough. I am confident. I have got phenomenal coping skills. Because often we don't do that. We're very negative. We say negative things about ourselves to ourselves. And that can be because when we're growing up, that's what we heard. Maybe we heard things like, you're never going to amount to anything. You're not as good as your sister. Look how good she's done at, university, or you're not as good as your brother. And, a lot of clients I've had recently have been clients that have been living in their shadows of their siblings, and that's a big thing. And I had a client recently who said, she was the brains, but she didn't always feel pretty. And when she came to see me, she said, funnily enough, my sister said the opposite. She had issues where she felt like she was pretty, but she was never as brainy as me. So we all have these issues, right? And it's just, and they're there because of what we hear, what we pick up from when we're younger. So, saying the right words to yourself is very, very, very important. And visualizing, what you picture, you manifest. So if you see yourself training, you're working out, then that's what you're prepping your mind to do. Whereas if you say, I can't go to that spin class, I can't do it, then you're prepping your mind and your body to stop. And that's what happens, because your body will always copy your mind. If you think about when you go for a job interview, if you're nervous, your hands will sweat. So your body is copying your mind. So a lot of athletes use visualization skills because it really helps them get to that finishing line, or, row a bit faster, run a bit faster, lift heavier weights. It's a case of telling your mind and visualizing it. When you can visualize yourself lifting 10 kilos more, then you're prepping your mind to do what you've asked it to do, and then it translates into your body.
Sharan, that's one side of things where you're doing affirmations, visualization, but what about actually dealing with what I muck, like the actual problems here at play? There's only so much self-talk, visualization, and affirmations you can do to cover up what's really happening. How do you deal with the actual root cause of what's going on? Like breaking that down so you don't have to keep relying on self-talk, or is it a case of just using that self-talk to reprogram?
So the whole self-talk and visualization, that really comes as that comes at the end. So that's part of reprogramming the mind. But before you can reprogram the mind, of course, you're right, you have to deal with the root cause. And so there's a few different techniques that I teach my clients in terms of letting go. And it's all about reframing that belief, because often we have a belief that's been there since we were 6, 7 years old. And that's still there, right? So if you were bit by a dog, then you're still going to be scared of dogs at 35. But actually, does it serve you? No, it doesn't. So you have to reframe that belief. So one technique of letting go of that root cause is to disassociate yourself from that younger you. So it's not, you're not saying it didn't happen. It did happen and you dealt with it at that time. But what you're saying now is that's not me now. So, for example, if you're 35, you say, I'm not 5 anymore. I don't need to act or react like I did when I was 5. I'm 35, so I don't need to be scared of a dog because I know that not all dogs are dangerous. So one way of letting go is to go back to each scene and to go through that scene and say, that's not me. That's never going to be me. That's not my life anymore. And sometimes things happen in people's lives where adults were rude to them or horrible to them. Maybe they were hit, maybe they were abused. But actually at 35, if, your teacher that was horrible to you, was exactly the same now at 35, would you still deal with it in the same way? And you wouldn't. However, you still feel that same way. So it's about going back and saying, well, actually, that's not me. The second way of letting go, and this is used, a lot of different kinds of people use this technique, and it's well documented. It's called healing the inner child or upgrading the child. So it's about getting that young you and upgrading them into your world. So it's almost like, you've been living in their life for all these years because you've had these belief systems for a long time. But now you're saying, well, actually, you live in my life now. And in my life, this is available to me. We can do this. So you're upgrading that young child into your life. And, maybe if you were rejected when you were younger, or, you felt like you didn't belong, you're now becoming a friend to that kid or a parent. And you're saying, you know what, I'm going to love you. I will never reject you. And you are now in my life where there's lots of love available to you. So it's a lot of healing of that child by you. Because often when people feel rejected in their past, they're often rejected by their parents or siblings or teachers, people that, they look up to. And because they weren't able to get that love from those people, they're now getting it from themselves, if that makes sense. So you are loving that younger version of yourself that didn't get everything he or she needed. And that can be quite powerful because you are giving that younger version of yourself everything that he didn't get or she didn't get. So often as a child, maybe, you were told you're not good enough. So I often say to clients, say all the things out loud that you wanted to hear that you didn't hear when you were a kid. So maybe you wanted to hear that, you're a great brother, you're a great son, we're so lucky to have you, we're very proud of you, all those things that you didn't hear, that you wanted to hear, no matter what it was, you now learn to say to yourself. And you do it in that kind of, you are at 35, your adult version of you, and you're now saying those things to that younger you, but also to yourself. So you're upgrading that child into your life. And there's lots of work that's been done around healing the inner child, and it can be a very powerful technique. And obviously different techniques resonate differently with people as well. The other technique is to...
Sorry, Sharan, just to ask a question about that technique.
Yeah.
How are you doing this healing? Is it with someone else like yourself, or is it journaling? Is it self-talk? Like, how are you, even for the first technique, what is the process of actually doing it?
Well, it's all talking that I do through the session itself, because my sessions are quite long. So we go through all these techniques in detail. Obviously, I'm just going... Okay,
so these are techniques that are happening as soon as you identify the issue.
Yeah,
it's happening
so as soon as we identify...
It's not a thereafter event.
No. So as soon as we identify the root cause, then right there and then, you have to let go, right? Because you can't move forward unless you let go, but you can't let go of something unless you know what you're letting go of. So we identify the root cause and then we let go. So these techniques, I've explained 2 of them. Sometimes we don't need to go through all of them. Sometimes we go through all of them. It depends on what's come up. It depends on the client. Sometimes, for example, if someone's been abused, physically abused, there's different techniques to deal. It depends on how they feel. You might not want to go through every technique, because one of the techniques to let go is talking to the person that hurt you. Because often we don't. As a child, for example, if you were abused, you might have kept that in. You might have never told anybody. And the thing is, when you keep things inside yourself, they fester, they can turn to anger, they can turn to addiction, they can turn to all sorts of things. So it's about letting it come out. So I do like a role play with my clients, with whoever's hurt them. And that can be really, really powerful, especially if it's their parent. And even if they're not alive, and I just say, imagine they're here right now. What do you want to say to them? And they come out with all kinds of things that they've never been able to express By being allowed to express yourself and have a voice, you can start to heal yourself. And so that technique can be really powerful for people. And often I've had clients where they've then gone on to actually have a proper conversation with their parent, or they've written it in a letter, but they've really expressed how they felt. Because if you don't express yourself, it can only be a negative thing, because it can turn to anger, it can turn to lots of different negative emotions. And all anger is unexpressed hurt. So, when you're not able to express yourself, you're not able to let go. So that's a really important technique, to have that conversation. And especially if they were hurt by someone, whether it was a peer, another child, or whether it was somebody who abused them, somebody who was their uncle or aunt, having that power and saying, you can never hurt me again, as a 35-year-old, is quite powerful. And often I do get clients to swear, because swearing can be quite empowering, because as a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old, you're not allowed to swear. You would have got told off, or maybe even slapped for swearing. But as a 35-year-old, for example, you can, and you are sticking up for that young child who couldn't stick up for himself. So that's a very powerful technique.
So there's 3 key ones. You want to just recap those 3?
Yeah.
So you got the second, one of them was healing your inner child.
Yeah.
The second one was talking to the people, or addressing the people who...
Yeah, so I call the first one, that's not me.
Okay,
going back to each scene in your life and saying, that's not me. I don't need you to love me, if someone didn't love them. I don't live in that world. I live in a world now where love is available to me. I know that I am enough. I am lovable. I'm not a dependent child. I can love me, and I can give myself everything I need. Mm-hmm. The second way, the second technique is upgrading or healing the inner child. And often I say, to really implement this, imagine a house that you grew up in. Imagine that bedroom. Imagine yourself in that bedroom with that younger version of you sitting on that bed where you slept every night, and then talking to that child and saying, I am becoming a loving parent to you. I'm becoming a loving friend. You are part of me now, and you're safe. You can't be rejected. You can never be abandoned, because I'm here loving you always. And then the third technique is speaking to the person that hurt them. Like I said, those feelings are either kept inside you or outside you. And when they're outside of you, you do better, you feel better, because you're able to get closure. And add some swear words. Really tell that person how they've hurt you, and tell them how they can never hurt you again. And often I make people say things like, you're not important, I am. And sometimes they can find that difficult, especially if it's their mum or their dad, But the truth is that, at 35, 40, you don't need your parents in the way that you did when you were younger. Mm. And when people realize that, that's when they really start to think, actually, yeah, when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, I really was dependent on my parents, and I needed my dad to tell me I was good. But actually at 35, 40, I don't. And, when they start to begin to realize that everything that they want, they can give themselves, that can be like a light bulb moment for some people, when they realize that, they can give themselves all the love they need. They can praise themselves, because often, people didn't get that praise from their dad or their mum that they wanted. Not that they had bad parents. It's just maybe their parents were hard on them. Maybe they didn't give them enough praise, and they put more pressure on them. But just by saying, to that person, well, I know you didn't mean it, but actually, because of what you did, I've been, suppressing myself, or I've been hurting myself because you made me feel that I wasn't good enough. And just by saying these words, just by acknowledging that, even though you love your mom and dad, they still hurt you. And just by acknowledging that and saying it out loud, it can be really profound for people. And often that's the point where people start to cry, because, they obviously get upset, and they realize now that this is, what's made me I don't know, have social anxiety. This is what's made me fear, rejection and fear moving on to that next part of my life, because my dad made me feel like I wasn't good enough. And so it's about having that conversation with them and saying, you can't ever make me feel like that ever again, because I matter, I am important, I am enough. And so that's the third way of letting go. And then the fourth way of letting go, it's imagining, and I often say to people, when I say the word anxiety, if it's anxiety they have, where do you feel it? And a lot of people say that, we feel it in our chest, or we feel it in our stomach. The stomach is usually the seat of a lot of emotion. And so I said, wherever you can feel it, give it a color, give it a shape. So really, it's almost like you're giving the anxiety, you're giving it substance, right? You're giving it a shape and a color. Maybe it's moving fast, maybe it's making noise, and then jump into that color. And then I get them to speak as the anxiety. And actually a lot of stuff normally comes out, because when they start speaking as the anxiety, they start telling me themselves that I'm here, I'm in so-and-so's life because I want to protect them from further hurt, or I want to punish them. It's always either protection or punishment. But what I then make them do is I make them have a conversation with that anxiety as though they are the employer and this part of them is the employee. So you have this conversation with the employee and you say, thank you for being in my life for so many years, because, our mind will always do what it thinks is, it's supposed to do for our survival. So thank you for, being in my life for so many years, for example, making me procrastinate because you don't want me to fail. But actually, do you know what? I want to take the chance. I want to see if I can create success. So I don't need you anymore. And then I make them have a conversation with that part of them and say, it's time for you to go. And then we have a whole conversation with that part of them. And again, it's some of it can be visualization, visualizing that part of you in your body like sand, and it's trickling out of your feet like a bit like a sand timer. And then when it trickles out, you are slowly shutting that valve, permanently shut, so it can never go back into your body again. So these are all different techniques, and you don't have to use all of them. It's about finding one that resonates with you, and different ones resonate with people, depending on what the root cause is and who's involved. But when you do all four in the session together, it's an understanding. It's an understanding of this is the root cause. And often when we find the root cause, as I did with you, and make people, have their left hand and their right hand out. And I say, this is your left hand, which is basically the root cause. So we've asked your mind, why do you have an addiction to alcohol, or why do you, have an addiction to chocolate? And this is what your mind is saying. And this is your right hand, which is your life today. And, if you look at your right hand and left hand, your right hand is being controlled by this left hand. And so when they look at these scenes, often they're scenes where there can be quite simple scenes that you might have known of before, but you didn't really understand what was going on in that scene, and you didn't really understand the implications in that scene and what they meant. And then people really do have that kind of light bulb moment that, oh my God, because I was bullied in the playground, because I was bullied by my aunt, because that happened, they all made me feel like I wasn't good enough. They all made me feel like I was being rejected. And so when you figure out that moment where this is the root cause, and you can understand how that left hand is affecting that right hand. And then that's when we move on to the techniques of letting go.
Wow. There's a lot to take in there.
Yeah.
You've gone through the hypnosis, you've discovered the root cause, you do the right hand and left hand, you go through the 4 different ways of letting go. And then you're left to come back out of hypnosis. And the question now is, what is the next steps? What do you recommend people to do after the process with you? What are the key practices that you advise both in the short term and in the long term to solidify the gains? Because one of the things I found interesting from what you said is you'll only need one session with me. And I'd probably agree in that you only, it's the intensity is high and it's so revealing that one session, it's not something you can do every week, I don't think.
No.
So what do you recommend for people to do short and long term after?
The thing is, the reason why I say one session is because when you uncover the root cause, normally that is it, right? That's the root cause. And if you were to have more sessions, you would probably just uncover more seams that had the same feeling. And so essentially it's that root cause is still, if you need another session, it's because that root cause is still there and you haven't dealt with it. But what you do after the whole letting go technique is I send clients a personalized recording to listen to. And that recording, it's like having a hypnotherapy session every time you listen to it, because first of all, it's self-hypnosis if you listen to it correctly. And secondly, it's all positive, descriptive words. So that is the part that will then help to reprogram and reframe your mind into a new set of beliefs. And the important thing to remember is that change can take time. Change for some people can be instantaneous. I've had some people that, really had that light bulb moment and they're really like, wow, like, I can't believe I was that way because of that person. And they've left my office and they haven't even needed the recording. And I've got some people who,
to be honest, that was me. Like what I discovered in that session, all I needed to do was go and like just journal about it, think about it. But the main finding was enough for me to think, okay, I think I've got what I needed from it, and it's just now up to me to rewire it. But I didn't listen to it much after.
And that rewiring is what the recording does. But like I said, if you don't need the recording and you can rewire it yourself, then fine. But what the recording just does, it's just there with positive, descriptive, repetitive words. Because one of the ways in which the mind learns, that the mind works, is that it learns by repetition. So your mind, the more you repeat something to it, the more it's going to take it on. And that leads on to the second way the mind works, is that your mind likes familiar and it doesn't like unfamiliar. So if it's unfamiliar for you to do exercise, the minute you start doing it, your mind's going to say, what are you doing? We don't do exercise. We haven't done it for years. And it will make you stop because it's unfamiliar. But the more you do it, the more you just persevere and you do it, then the more it becomes familiar. You hear stories all the time of really like obese people who have lost loads of weight and start running marathons because they've made exercise familiar. So you can make familiar unfamiliar, and you can make the unfamiliar familiar. And the recording helps you do that. So I have people sometimes texting me a year later saying, I've just got a new phone, I've lost the recording, can you send it, have you still got a copy to send to me? And I do always keep backups on email, so I'll send them back out again. But they're just there as a, to reprogram the mind, because they say it takes about 3 weeks for your brain to develop a new neurological pathway. So 21 days to change a habit. You've probably heard that before. But it can be less than that, and it can also be more. It can take up to 200 days sometimes. For me, Akash, the two things that I would say to anyone in any kind of therapy or any kind of event that happens in their life, it's consistency and commitment. So if you can show commitment to something and you can be consistent with it, then it will work for you. And so if you listen to something enough, you're going to become it. If you listen to something that says, for example, negative stuff every day, then you're going to become that negative person. Whereas if you listen to positive, descriptive words that are basically, because when I do the personalized recording, it's straight after the session. So it's all about what they want to be. It's all about how they want to feel, how they, want to behave. And that's normally opposite of how they start off with. And so when you listen to, you are smashing it, you are confident, every day you believe in yourself more and more, people like you like them, every day your self-esteem is increasing. And when I say these words repetitively over a 20-minute period, and you listen to that every day, then you're going to start taking it in. So that's why I say one session is enough, because the recording is what's going to help to reprogram your mind. But like I said, the mind works in different ways. So one of them is repetitiveness. One of it is by visualizing and saying affirmations. So, things like having a journal, like you said, they help because you're expressing yourself. And if you have something where you can express gratitude, then by expressing gratitude, you're shifting your mindset to a more positive mindset. So all of these things help. Reading, exercise, affirmations are a very, very important part. I used to actually say back in the day to a lot of my clients, when I used to have mainly women, now I have a good mixture, but I used to say, get a lipstick and write on your mirror, I am enough. And actually, my girls used to have that on their mirror until my cleaner rubbed it off by accident one day. But if it's there on your mirror, you see it every day. You read it every day. And some people might feel that I am enough. It's a bit, woo-woo. But actually, I am not enough is the root cause of so many problems. That saying I am enough is really, really important. And sometimes I get people saying to me, but I say it and I don't feel it. I say it, but I feel like a fraud. And initially, yes, you may feel like a fraud. You may feel like you're lying to yourself and you're cheating yourself by saying I'm enough when you don't feel it. But like I said, one of the ways in which the mind works, it likes familiar and it doesn't like unfamiliar. But so the more you start saying I am enough, I believe in myself, then you will. And that's that changing point. And of course, all of these things, they are obviously really important. But what's more important before you say all of these things is that you really have let go of that root cause, that you really believe that. So, if feeling like you weren't good enough came out in the sessions as, from the scenes that you had, then it's really about reframing that and saying, well, actually, he or she can't make me feel like that. I am enough. So it's really about recognizing what it is that's made you feel like you're not enough. Because once you can understand what it is that's made you feel like you're not enough, then it's much easier to reprogram.
Yeah. So discover, let go, and then reprogram.
Yeah. Like and obviously there's some things you can reprogram very easily. Like, for example, giving up sugar in your tea. You don't need to find the root cause of that, right? You just need to make it unfamiliar. And you can do that, quite easily over 3 weeks. But things like smoking, things like, food, that's a bit more deep rooted. Often when people have an issue with food, it goes quite far back. And, when you're younger, food has all different kinds of connotations. It's your friend. It's a comfort thing. If often your mom and dad were never home or, you were abused, food was there. Food never answered back to you. Food made you feel good. So, food's a different kind of thing. You can't just reprogram that. You have to...
Can you go into food? Because a lot of people struggle with binging, not being able to control food, bad relationships with food. I mean, there's so many different ways people have problems with food. But let's discuss the issue of overeating or binging and dive into that, because that's ultimately what gets people out of shape. Yeah. And one of the habits that people revert back to, struggle to eliminate. What is going on here? I mean, there's so many different causes, but what is the common trends that you're seeing, and how do people overcome this?
So what drives us to overeat is ultimately our feelings. You say, I need to have that. I must have that. If I eat chocolate, it'll make me feel better. I know I do that definitely in the time of my month, when I'm it's my time in that month and I'm hormonal. I'm like, oh yeah, chocolate makes me feel better. but it's feeling. It's not hormonal, it's a feeling. And one of the ways in which the mind works is that feelings will always overcome logic because they're much more powerful. You know, if you're scared of a spider and it's in the room, you might be like screaming, but the spider's not going to kill you. It's tiny, but the feeling is much more stronger than the logic. And so what you have to do is you've got to change the feeling, not the logic. You have to change what you attach as important when it comes to food. And it's about reprogramming your mind to going back to the way you were when you were a baby. Because when you're a baby, you never overeat, right? You know, your mom tries to feed loads of like mushy food, and as soon as you're full up, your face turns the other way or you spit it back out, because you're already programmed as a baby to only eat when you're full, up to when you're full, and that's it. Whereas we don't. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of the words that we say to ourselves are really, really important. We always say, oh, we are what we eat, but actually we are what we speak. Our words become our reality. So when you say, oh God, I'm starving, I could eat a horse, your brain believes what you say and it encourages you to overeat. So we have that appy stat that kicks in, you know, when you've eaten and you're full. But if you've already told your brain that I'm so hungry I could eat a horse, then you're encouraging your mind to ignore that appy stat and it overeats.
So is it a case of people, if they've got issues with food, they really just need to, it's not the diet plan, it's not anything to do that's happening in the moment. They need to really go back, discover the root cause, identify the muck, and deal with the real cause, and let go of whatever is causing them to find pleasure in food and use it as a crutch compared to, as opposed to fuel that you're brought up with. And is that what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, you have to change your feelings rather than the diet. Obviously, diet's important, but it's the feelings that you have to change.
Is that why you see so many people lose control over food and ultimately get themselves into bad positions in the first place? Like, from my experience, people that come to us who have put on a lot of weight or have lost control of their days or have lost their confidence in their body, all of these things, it all comes back to specific moments or triggers, which then link to deep-rooted causes and I like to call muck, which people are struggling to deal with but haven't actually dealt with, or they aren't actually aware of what was the real cause from the past that's triggered all of this behavior later on, like these bad lifestyle choices. They haven't come from just being lazy and being busy. It's come from these deep-rooted issues that are triggered.
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes people think, for example, if they have big parents, you know, and the siblings are big, they often have a belief system that they can't be slim. You know, so there's so many things that are ingrained in us at a subconscious level that stop us from really being that kind of, you know, the slim or athletic version of themselves that they want to be. And a lot of people do, you know, yo-yo dieting where they lose a certain number of pounds or kilos and then they go back to putting on weight and they lose it again up to that certain point and then they put it back on again, but they can never get beyond that point. Because again, that's a belief system that their mind is telling them that you can lose weight up to a certain point, but then you can't do more. And that they're all ingrained belief systems.
How much of it is a protection mechanism, whereby the people have used food as a protection mechanism from things that happened in the past?
Yeah. I had a client once who he was really, really big, and he was actually abused physically by his next door neighbor. It was harrowing and it was awful. And he used to always say, if only I was bigger, I could protect myself. And just that simple word of, if I was bigger, I could protect myself, it made him eat, you know, because your mind takes what you say as literal. If I'm bigger, I can protect myself. So he became bigger. And it was an amazing session. So yeah, we have all kinds of beliefs around food. I had a guy who's actually in the fitness industry, and his mum would never let him play out. So his friends would knock for him, and he was home, but she would always say, no, sorry, he's not home. So in under hypnosis, he had this scene where he's just sitting there eating breakfast on the sofa. And I said, what are you eating? And he's like, a packet of Haribo's. So he had this relationship with food where food was his friend. And so he began binge eating because it gave him comfort, because when he never had friends, food was his friend. So yeah, food is really like, there's a lot of underlying issues with food that come back to childhood, and ultimately they come back to, these feelings of rejection, these feelings of not being good enough, where actually food has replaced that. But ultimately, food can't replace that void. And as cliche as it sounds, it's love for yourself, because the minute you have a chocolate bar, you eat it, but then 5 minutes later you feel like, oh, why did I eat that? Because it doesn't really fill that void that you're trying to fill.
And that void is only filled by, like you said, self-love.
And there's things you can do. There's choices you can make. So when it comes to food, by using your power of choice, you can succeed in losing weight or doing exercise. Because the minute you say, I can't have that biscuit, I'm not allowed that chocolate, then you're likely to want it even more because you're trying to deny a desire. So what you do is you replace the I can't with I'm choosing not to. Because when you say I'm choosing not to, what you're doing is you're telling your mind that you have a choice and you are making the right choice willingly. And so there's techniques that you can learn that help you make the right choices. So just replacing words with can or I choose to, they will help you be in control and have power. And that makes your brain believe that you want to do this. Studies have shown successful people don't have can't in their vocabulary. I'm sure Donald Trump doesn't have that in his vocabulary either. So you just choose to say, I choose to, I choose not to, but try to avoid the word can't. At the same time, you're moving away from denial and resistance as well. So when you constantly say, I can't have this, you're literally increasing your desire for it. Have you ever noticed when you're in a place where there's no toilets that suddenly you want to go? So it's really important that you know that actually you can eat whatever you want to eat, but you're choosing not to. So you have a mindset that food will always be available to you, but it's only when you get into the mindset of this is not allowed that you want more of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, this is why I always think, this is why I know that this journey that we take people through is more than just the physical, because once you make a physical transformation, the introspection and self-awareness that you cultivate allows you to ask yourself these questions.
Yeah.
And asking yourself these questions of, why am I doing this? What is the void I'm filling? Or what is the crutch I'm holding on to? And you start looking into the root causes and start eliminating and dealing with them and letting go of them, which then allow you to keep whatever you're doing for the long term.
Yeah.
Because then you're not using the crutches or the voids to fall back on. And that's why people yo-yo a lot, because they haven't dealt with the actual root cause. And all they've done is a surface level change when they haven't actually rewired their systems, their identity and their behavior to actually facilitate a long-term transformation.
Yeah. Well, what people do when they're on diets is they only focus on giving up the action, but actually they still have the same thought process. And so they end up overeating and even sometimes regaining the weight that they've lost. If you want to change your actions, you have to change your thoughts first. Your thoughts are the most real thing that you have, and your thoughts are driven by your beliefs. I think there's a famous quote by John Drained who says, we first make our habits and then our habits make us. So if your habit is eating chocolate and your habit of thought is chocolate cheers me up and makes everything better, then you have to give up the thought habit as well as the action. Because if you just give up the action, the thought process is still there, right?
That's huge. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But all beliefs can be changed if we introduce doubt. The minute you begin to question something, you no longer really believe it. So look at all your beliefs, about food, your beliefs about your weight. Just because your parents are big, that doesn't mean that you have to be big. Look at your beliefs about your eating habits. I know my husband does this. He comes home from work. He may have been really good at work, but as soon as he comes home, he goes straight for the kitchen cupboards, because when he was younger, that's what he used to do after school. He'd come home from school and he'd open the cupboards and he'd look for something to eat. So, we all have these belief systems around food, around eating habits. But it's really important to change the negative reactions in your body. And I keep going back to the visualization, but, our brain and our nervous system, it responds to mental images, regardless of whether it's self-induced or from the external world. And that mental image becomes a blueprint for your mind. So you need to have this image of your head of how you want to be, how you want to look.
Sharan, what do you say to, you brought up some really good points, and I think there's going to be a lot of people thinking about certain behavior patterns that they have or thought habits. What do you say to people who may have identified friends or family that refuse to seek help?
It's a really difficult one, isn't it? So it's very similar to, trying to get someone to go to see their GP. You can't force people to do something they don't want to do. All you can do is supply them with the information, and then they have to make a choice. Because ultimately, if you force someone to do something but their mind is not into what you're telling them to do, then it's not going to work, because they're not listening to you. So they have to be willing and, like I said, committed and consistent with, wanting that change. Otherwise, it's not going to work, unfortunately.
I know some people, friends and family who really would benefit from, whether it's hypnotherapy or whether it's some form of therapy to deal with these root causes, but there's still a stigma around all of this. It's growing in popularity, or popularity is probably the wrong word, but awareness and value. But there's still a stigma attached to people saying that they're going to therapy, or people that are saying that they're going to see someone to talk about issues.
There is, you're right. Yeah.
There still needs to be that kind of open conversation about it. What can people do to increase this awareness? I mean, coming on a podcast and people listening to this is part of it, but what can people do on a more one-to-one basis with their friends and family to encourage this sort of discussion and awareness in the household? It'd be interesting to know how you facilitate discussion around this with your kids and your husband and family, because I think it's such an important part of conversation to have as a family.
Yeah, we actually have a question jar at home that just because my kids probably prefer not to journal because they're still 9 and 11, they're not really into journaling. So we have a question jar. So not every day, but we try to do it as often as we can. We have these questions in the jar, and we pull out 3 questions a day, and we talk about them over dinner or maybe when they come back from school. And it could be any kinds of questions in there, like, what made you happy today? How did you show kindness to someone? Did someone make you feel sad? So they're really quite, basic questions, but what it does, it facilitates conversation. And so we can all, and there's a lot of it going around at the moment, isn't there? On TV, they've got that whole thing about pausing and talking and coming off your social devices and just having conversation with people. And it's definitely getting better. And definitely I'm seeing more men, which is a good thing, because men tend to not seek out for help, whether it's GP or any other kind of therapy. But I really believe in therapy, and I think we should do more of it in this country. We should follow the US and have, marriage counselling before you get married, and, have therapy once a week just to get off your chest what you're feeling. Because like I said to you earlier, if it's not outside of you and it's inside of you, then it can fester and it can lead to so many negative problems. So we have to talk. And some people do feel embarrassed about talking because they feel like, well, it's a fear. It's a fear of, am I the only person that feels like this? But I say to everybody, trust me, you're not. Everybody has issues, even if they're not the same issues. everybody has some kind of issue, whether it's, to do with food, whether it's to do with anxiety about a particular thing, whether it's to do with, anger, or whether it's to do with confidence. We all have issues that we tend to hide. But it's really, we don't have to hide it anymore. We just have to know where it's come from and deal with it so that we can move on and be confident and get over the anxiety and get over the addiction. Addiction's a big one, especially now when, there's so much of the drinking culture and there's so much social media out there that makes you feel inadequate. I've never met an addict who believes they're enough. That, the root of all addiction is I'm not good enough. And that's what an addiction is. An addiction to anything, whether it's chocolate, alcohol, drugs, gambling, shopping, it's something that takes you from a bad feeling to a good feeling. And your mind doesn't know what's good and bad, because if it did, we wouldn't do drugs. It just knows pain and pleasure. So your mind will say, you know what, inject heroin, take cocaine, drink another glass because it makes you forget the pain. And that's what we do. But, going back to the talking to your family members, telling them how you feel, providing the different sources of, help that's out there for them, is a start. But ultimately, you can't force someone. All you can do is provide them with the necessary information. And, the signposting is what we used to call it in pharmacy, signposting them to the right places to go to.
Sharan, if someone wants to work with you specifically or find out more about what you do, how could they reach out to you?
For me in particular, I've got a website called newmehypnotherapy.com. I always like to have a phone conversation with people first, 20-minute, half an hour conversation to really explain what I do so they understand it, to find out a bit more about them. And then we just take it from there.
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll put those in the show notes. One thing I haven't actually asked you is what is hypnotherapy? It sounds strange to end this conversation on that, but what is hypnotherapy? What is actually happening to you?
So
people know, because again, there's another stigma around hypnotherapy itself, right?
Yeah, there is, because everyone thinks of the stage hypnotists that, they hypnotize everyone and they click their fingers and make them bark like dogs or, cluck like chickens or something. But I actually don't use hypnosis to that same level that stage hypnotists do. They use a lot of deepening techniques where you kind of feel like you're asleep. I don't. I use it at a very therapeutic level, so that it's just at the right level where your subconscious is more active. And that's what hypnotherapy is. It's basically going into the alpha brainwave, which is a very similar thing to when you're sleeping and you're having the REM sleep, which some people are probably aware of. That's the same kind of, that's the same wavelength that you're on. And when you're in that wavelength, your subconscious mind is more active. So if you think of the mind as two parts, you have your conscious mind and your subconscious. Your conscious mind is responsible for logic and reasoning, and your subconscious mind is like the powerhouse for all your emotions. So it's where your memories are stored, it's where your beliefs are stored. So for example, if you want to give up smoking, you might be consciously aware that, I need to give up smoking. It's not good for me. It costs me a lot of money. But subconsciously, the first thing you do every morning is light up a cigarette. So you have to get to that subconscious mind and find out, well, why? What's your belief system? And that's what hypnotherapy does. It opens up your subconscious mind. And people bring out all kinds of scenes, including yourself, right? Like sometimes people say, wow, I wasn't even aware of that scene, or, I didn't even know that scene had any importance to it. And so people bring up all kinds of scenes under hypnosis that they wouldn't necessarily maybe talk about under, maybe counseling or any other kind of talking therapy, which is why it can be very effective. And we all experience hypnosis. Some people say to me, what if I can't be hypnotized? And I always say, if you're driving home from somewhere and you reach home and you think, wow, I don't remember that traffic light. I don't remember that roundabout. That's hypnosis, because consciously you might be thinking about what you're going to eat for dinner when you get home, but subconsciously your mind has done that journey so many times that it gets you home safely. And that's hypnosis. So we all experience hypnosis, all the time. So everybody can be hypnotized. It's just a state of mind, quite simply put. And it's that state of mind where you're accessing stuff that, it's like if your computer, you can type and change your, change things on your computer superficially. But if you wanted to fix something that is in the, whatever it's called, hardwire or whatever, you would employ someone who's specializes in IT to do that for you, right? And that's the analogy. That's the subconscious mind. You need someone to help you access your subconscious mind so you can get there and you can get those answers.
Amazing. One thing I was going to mention earlier on, or at the start of this, I was going to say, do you want to take us all through hypnotherapy on this podcast? But then I thought it's way too intense for that. And I think if anyone is listening and wants to uncover the root causes, identify the muck, and really understand more about themselves, I'd highly, highly recommend them to visit Sharan or book in a call with her. We'll link the show notes. We'll link your website into the show notes so people can reach out to you and find out more about what you do. But thank you so much for coming on. And if you've got any parting words, I'd love to hear them.
No, thank you for having me. It's been really good. And I could talk about this forever. It's something that I'm really passionate about. And I just, going back to my roots as a pharmacist, I truly believe that, this is the true drug, that can fix you. This is your mind, and your mind has all the answers. You just have to dig deep, find those answers, so you can then reframe them into something that works for you and not against you.
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening and your goal is self-mastery and you want to understand yourself to the greatest degree possible and understand why you are how you are today, and your behavior systems, your belief systems, your thought processes, this is just one of the amazing tools that you can use to help uncover that and really develop and build upon from there to increase your overall level of self-awareness and ultimately strive towards self-mastery.
Yeah. And it is, I'd just like to finish off by saying, it's an ongoing process. We always, the only way to grow is really step out of your comfort zone all the time, and that requires to work on yourself. So it's not a case of just, one time and that's it. After that, you have to constantly remind yourself of how great you are. You have to say, I am enough. I matter. I belong. I'm important. I'm meant to be here and be happy. Visualize yourself as being slim. Visualize yourself as having success and happiness. So all of those things are constant, and you have to do those things consistently for your mind to, really make that familiar and make that, something that works for you all the time and not just a one-off thing.
Amazing. Always a journey.
Yeah, exactly. Always a journey.
Thanks so much for coming on, Sharan.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here today on this episode of RNT Fitness Radio. I'd love for you to do a quick little favor for us. Please head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating, leave a comment, and share it with your family and friends. If you're interested in learning more about how to transform your body and positively change your life, go to www.rntfitness.com and explore all our free content on offer. Thank you.